Okay, hello and welcome. Today what I want to talk about very quickly is the difference between 1440p at 30 frames a second and the other resolutions on the camera. Take example for 2K. Right now I'm recording in 2K, and if you notice I'm kind of cut off at the top. My head's kind of cut off. Well, the reason is because 2K, like 4K and also 1080p, 720p, those resolutions all record in 16:9 aspect ratio, where the 1440p resolution and the 960p resolution record in 4:3 aspect ratio. So 4:3 is taller but shorter on the sides, where 16:9 is wider on the sides but more narrow at the top, so it's cutting off the top. So what I want to show you is why would we want to record in 1440 versus 2K or 1080p. It depends on the situation, but any POV shot, you know, head mount, chest mount, those kind of things, I think that the 1440 is something we should utilize. So I'm going to switch over to 1440 right now and let you see this exact same shot. Notice the basketball rim, my head, everything, and notice when I go to 1440 that the frame is going to be bigger. It's a bigger frame, recording more of the information. Okay, so let's switch over to 1440. Okay, now we're in 1440, and you will see that there's more space at the top and bottom. The sides are still stretched out because in the GoPro Studios software, it will expand the sides to fill in the full frame automatically. Something else we can do is, rather than have the full frame displaying like it is, squished down 4:3 wide, basically is what you're seeing right now, we can also have it pan, so just up or down, because we have extra footage, extra video that's being recorded at the top and bottom because we're recording in 4:3. So what I'll do right now is show you what I mean by panning up and down. So if I pan up, now I can pan back down, and now I can pan down, back up. So see how I did that? I do all of that in GoPro Studios with the vertical slider. So once you import your footage, on the vertical slider on the right, you can move that slider left or right, and it will pan your footage up or down. The other option, if you want to make it 1080p super view, basically, just hit the 4x wide option down there in the presets, and it will squish the footage down to make it all fit into the 1080p timeline. Okay? So real quick again, what I will do is switch between the different formats in this exact same shot, so you'll see the difference between 4K, 2K, 1440p, 1080p, and then we'll go 1080p super view, and maybe even 720p, just so you'll see it. There's really no difference between a lot of those. There's a gnat flying around. But I want you to see the difference in the video by changing those settings. Okay, so right now we're going to switch to 4K. Let's go to 4K. Right now we're in 1440p still, so notice the difference between 1440p and 4K. Okay, this is 4K. Again, notice how the video is squished down. My head is kind of cut off in the shot. Okay, now let's go to 2K, 30 frames a second. Okay, here we are in 2K, 30 frames a second. Again, the same shot. It's because this is a 16:9 aspect ratio. Very quickly, let's jump down to 1440p aspect ratio, and notice again how the shot is bigger. Oh, 1440p. Okay, here we are, 1440p. You can see much more footage, top and bottom, and I can do the panning. I can pan down, and I can pan up. So this gives me a lot more options in my recording to be able to make sure I get the right shot. Like, say somebody shot the basketball, but their hand was out of the frame. With 1440, I might be able to move the frame up, and actually where you would see that, where you wouldn't miss that opportunity to get that shot. Let's jump down to 1080p super view. Oh, 1080p super view. Okay, here's 1080p super view. 1080p super view is technically the same as 1440p if it's shrunk down. So 1440p, you can do the 4x wide preset, and it will take the video and shrink it down and make it fit into the 1080p timeline that we're viewing. But it doesn't give us the option to pan. So that's the only thing different between 1080p super view and 1440p. I would still say record in 1440p unless you're doing a static shot where something like me is in the center of the frame with the super view, because if not, if I move to the edges or if you pan to the edges, the subject will become distorted looking. So I would still recommend recording in 1440p over the 1080p super view unless you need some sort of slow motion, because in 1080p super view you can do 60 frames a second, so that would give you a little bit of ability to do some slow motion. Let's jump down to just regular 1080p wide and notice the difference between 1080p wide and 1440. So again, here is 1080p wide. You will notice that my head is cut off in the shot due to it being 16:9 and not 4:3 aspect ratio. Now, if we did want to get some slow motion, and at the cost of a little bit of resolution, of course, we could go down to 960p, because at 960p, we can go to a higher frame rate. Okay, so here's 960p at 60 frames a second. And we can also increase this mode to 100 frames a second. So it's not the same as 120 frames a second that we can get out of the 720p, but at 960p we got a little bit better resolution than 720p. So this still, 100 frames a second is still pretty good for some pretty good slow motion. So I would recommend using 960p as well for a wider shot with a higher frame rate to get pretty good slow motion. Okay, so to conclude the video, here we are again in 1440p at 30 frames a second. Remember, some key notes is that 30 frames a second you cannot do any slow motion because your playback is 30 frames a second, so you can't do any slow motion at that. Remember that if you do want to do slow motion, you need more frames per second. So the more frames per second, the slower the footage can be, the better the slow motion can be, the smoother the slow motion can be. Of course, if you go to a higher frame rate, say 120 frames a second, 240 frames a second in WVGA, that's lower quality image, and you're going to want a lot of bright light. Anytime you increase the frame rates, it's really going to require a lot of light. So if the darker the environment, go with a slower frame rate, like a 30 frames per second or 24 frames a second. But just know that you can't do any slow motion to that. You can, but it's going to be blurry. It's just not going to look good. So anyway, I hope this helps you guys out today, and I hope you start recording in 1440p quite a bit, and possibly 960p for some slow motion. I know I will, especially for any of your POV shots, chest mount, head mount, anything like that.